What's going on, Digital Wildcatters? Welcome to another episode of the Oil and Gas Startups Podcast. This week, we got the man, Dave, CEO of IPT Well Solutions. He's just sitting here telling me about all of his ski trips that he's been taking this year, and he's got me super jealous. I'm probably about to leave this podcast and go hit up Montana after this. But Dave, how are you doing?
Yeah, doing great. Yeah, just got back from Denver last night, and I walked out Thursday morning, and they had like 12 inches of snow on my truck.
Yeah.
So there's a little. I sent that around to all my friends in Houston. A little bit different commute this morning than you guys are having.
Yeah, and then you
Yeah.
come to Houston. It's a chilly 60 degrees today.
Yeah.
Everyone's got their jackets on, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
little bit different
a little
of
bit different. Yeah.
a climate tolerance here to cold weather. But so tell me what IPT Well Solutions is real quick at a high level and what the company does.
Sure. So we're a full service consulting company. We've got 60 plus professionals that work at IPT. IPT's been around for 30 years. We've drilled over 6,000 oil and gas wells, in some form or fashion, from a drilling perspective or from a completion fracking perspective. We've drilled over 300 disposal wells, also both industrial type applications and also E&P type applications. We've worked for over 400 customers as well. So I'm a newbie there. I've been there for about 8 months.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm CEO of IPT, but we've got managing directors and we've got all sorts of professionals from a reservoir perspective, geological perspective, drilling, completion. So it's a fun place to be.
Got you. So IPT's a engineering consulting firm that helps upstream oil and gas companies and other entities drill and complete wells. Sounds like awesome.
Absolutely. So we do it from, so it's kind of a cradle to grave perspective. We start with geological investigation. We have reservoir characterization simulations. We've got all sorts of software that we can use to analyze the reservoir. And then we get into the drilling engineering execution part, and then the completion frac engineering part, and then the execution of that. And we've now brought on facilities engineering as well. We do compliance and permitting when it's needed for customers. And then, at the end of the day, we also P&A wells. So,
Yeah. So
to return the well back to the original state, the land.
So I've been from Seismic to
everything
P&A.
from right. And so I've been brought in, so IPT has been kind of a Denver-focused company. Sure, they've drilled wells in other parts of the United States, but a lot of the wells that they have drilled in the past have been in the Rockies. And so I was brought in June of last year to expand the geographic footprint. I've got a lot of Houston-based contacts. Spent a lot of time international as well, and then also put another portfolio part of the industry, which is environmental. And really, environmental today is a big facet, of the E&P world and also the industrial world. So we're expanding into, carbon capture and storage. We're expanding into the whole monitoring, reporting, verification part of injecting CO2 underground. And then methane emissions, the whole certification around that, and then the ESG part.
Yeah. What about geothermal? Are y'all moving into geothermal as well? Is it starting to get a little bit of traction?
Sure. So, geothermal's been around for a long time, but conventional geothermal is usually in bottom hole temperatures in excess of 400 degrees. So, for example, I was involved in a lot of Mighty River projects over in New Zealand. But geothermal has not been really a big mainstay in the United States, mainly because, the bottom hole temperature rock is cooler.
Yeah.
And so enhanced geothermal takes a different approach. It takes, that uses a different fluid in the turbines so that the boiling point is lower, so you can have lower temperature bottom hole pressures. But, we can use the whole extended reach thought process to create like enormous radiators underground so that the time that the fluid enters the well space to the time that the fluid exits the well space is sufficient enough to raise the temperature in maybe anywhere from 250 to 350 range.
Yeah.
And that is certainly right in the wheelhouse of enhanced geothermal.
Yeah, I find geothermal just be interesting right now because, like you said, it's been around for a long time, but now you have a bunch of oil and gas folks that are really good at drilling wells going over to geothermal and applying some of the things that we learned in the oil and gas industry over there. So
yeah, we've done some thermal heat maps in Colorado and Wyoming for our clients. We've also been involved in a research study project where you took a 5-mile lateral. It's basically a big horseshoe, and then we drill vertical wells to intersect that horseshoe. And so the horseshoe is the radiator, and the vertical well is just to take the fluid in and out.
That's basically what we could do.
It's kind of a cool project.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. That's I remember Shell, I think it was like 2 years ago, came out with a horseshoe lateral that they were drilling an oil and gas well. And I remember seeing that for the first time. I was like, it's just crazy what we can do a couple miles underground. I started drilling wells in 2010. Back then, we're still drilling mainly vertical conventional wells, 11,000 feet, and just to see in a decade what we're able to do and how fast we're able to drill these wells as well. It's just a kind of a model from an engineering perspective.
Yeah, I was involved in an extended reach project in the Sakhalin Island, and that was an Exxon project. And these guys were drilling 37,000 foot lateral wells, and then hit a box that's 150 feet in diameter. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. I mean,
so to put that in perspective, you drill a well in downtown Houston, and you hit a box in Sharpstown.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually some content that we should make. We should start overlaying laterals over like maps of
Houston. Yeah. That'd be pretty cool. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit, what's your background? Tell me a little bit about your story. It sounds like you've been at IPT for 8 months now.
Yeah, 8 months.
And, so tell me about before then.
Yeah, my story can be a long story or a short story, so I'll make it a short story. But I started in the
North. Medium to long. We got some time.
I started in the North Sea back in the 80s.
Oh,
so
wow.
I worked for a company called Sedco.
Yeah.
And for those guys that remember politics, Governor Clements was the owner of Sedco way back in the 70s and 80s. And so I started on a training program and went through that training program in the North Sea and decided that, my career track was supposed to be staff engineering and so forth. I really liked the drilling side of it. So I convinced the folks after the drilling or the training program to go as an assistant driller and then driller. So I spent some time overseas. It was a bargain, right? I had to negotiate this thing. So I spent some time in South Korea on the construction of a floater, semi-submersible, and then I came out as an assistant driller and then driller on that rig. And after 4 years,
on that rig that you constructed?
Yeah, I constructed.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I was a little nervous, but
yeah, like I built this thing.
Yeah, I built this thing. Hope it's okay. But after 4 years, the management said, "Look, Dave, we didn't hire you to be a driller on a semi-submersible." So I came to Dallas and started the whole staff engineering. But that's right when Sedco was being purchased by Schlumberger.
Okay.
And so my new boss was in Singapore, and he said, "Look, I don't need you in Dallas." And so he did me the favor of promoting me after 6 months to a district manager. So I started my international again in Doha, Qatar.
Okay.
And then that was in the mid 80s. And if you remember the mid 80s, or if you've heard about the mid 80s, it was a pretty volatile period of time.
Yeah.
And so we did a lot of startups, and I was one of the few single guys as a district manager. So I spent 4 years living out of a suitcase.
Yeah.
So
I said they probably sent you all around the world.
They did. I went to Dubai. I went to the east coast of Africa. I went over to India, China, and then finally Australia.
That's
And
pretty amazing.
yeah, it was kind of fun.
Yeah. And so that was all with Schlumberger at that
That
point?
was, yeah, it became Sedco Forex.
Okay.
And now that's, I guess, Transocean, I think.
Oh,
I
okay.
think that's
Yeah.
how that works out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good to get some of that
Yeah.
that evolution of company history to see who's kind of turned into who. So winding it back, when I come from the drilling side too,
Sure.
so I like asking questions on people's drilling stories. But so you build this rig in South Korea, then you go work on an assistant driller and then driller. Was that rig working out of Korea or
No, we took it to the North Sea.
Okay.
So it was just north of Bergen, kind of in the close to the Arctic Circle.
So I want to dive into the questions about the North Sea because I've worked deep water, but it's Gulf of Mexico, and so a lot calmer waters.
Sure.
And, not as harsh. But I've worked on the North Slope, so I got taste of negative 60 degrees Fahrenheit. But I was always really intrigued by the North Sea and wanted to go there. So what was it like working? One, in the North Sea, and then two, offshore back in the 80s. You had someone like me, I worked offshore in the 2010s, probably a much different experience than.
Yeah, we had more guys in each room. That was one big difference. Yeah. And, just the North Sea is a pretty hostile place. A lot of wind, a lot of waves. I think the first or second tour that I was there, I was doing some night watch. And that was the night that the Alexander Cleland, broke apart and flipped over. And I heard the SOS call at like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
And Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. And that's when the rig, flipped over. There's 126, 29 people that perished in that, bless them.
Yeah.
But,
imagine being out there.
Imagine being out there in that. It's pretty crazy.
That's one thing. It's funny. You go on TikTok and there's this huge oil field community on TikTok now, and a lot of people take videos of working offshore, and so it's great because like people like my wife who they've never been offshore, but they've heard me talk about it.
Yeah,
you're out there and seems like you're alone. Like there's nothing around you. It's just pitch black, and every time I'd be on an offshore rig, I think about the guys on Deep Horizon. And it's like
I've never seen that movie, and I never will. So that's too close to home.
Yeah, it's got to be a just terrifying position to be in it. Even for you on night watch and hearing the SOS Mayday call, that's got to send chills down your bones when you experience that. So the offshore world is fascinating. I think it's a fascinating marvel of human ingenuity and engineering. I wish everyone could go to a deep water drill ship and see that you just 40,000 foot wells off of a boat. It's pretty pretty mind boggling.
And that really propelled me into my next part of my career. I left Sedco Forex and started with a couple guys, actually retired Exxon guys, and started Triton Engineering. And I think I was employee number 2. And that was a fantastic part of my career where, we evolved in a consulting company, much like IPT today, but we also started a turnkey company that drilled over 400 wells in the Gulf of Mexico, jackup type wells and also floater wells, some 52 land-based wells along the Gulf Coast. We did 32 international wells. So
when you say,
it was a fascinating
turnkey, these oil and gas companies would come to you guys and say, hey, however, you come up with a budget for that, but they'd pay you to handle the drilling completions of that.
Right. We would spud the well, we would drill all the way through to the TD, and then we would log the well and we'd get paid. And then there was always follow-on work that we'd do on a separate turnkeys. But, there's a lot of turnkey companies that started back in the early 90s. There's only really 2 that made it. That was ADTI and Triton. And, it was what I learned through that whole process, you had to have a very good statistical modeling thought process, and to evaluate risk as well as just the whole downhole conditions of the wells, to try to find analogs somewhere else to try to compare that to the well that you're trying to do, and then steer clear of the high risk wells, and because the high risk wells were unpredictable, and so if it's unpredictable, then that's not a prudent turnkey, and so a lot of the companies that tried to do this just didn't understand how to risk matrix the wells that they're going to be drilling. And so they got involved in a well that they really didn't understand, and all sorts of bad stuff happened.
Yeah, I remember drilling we were next to this rig out in West Texas back 10 years ago or so, and that well was turnkey. And I remember they were on that well for like 3 months.
Yeah.
I mean, just fishing,
Yeah.
problem after problem. Right. And you think about it from like a business model perspective, like that's
right.
terrible business.
And really,
it's great for whoever paid for it.
It is great, but at the end of the day, a turnkey project that is successful, you look back on that and say, okay, I understood what I was doing, and I followed a plan. And so a big thing that I bring to IPT is don't bring your bias from somewhere else in the world to a well application that's not applicable, right? Yeah. And so we have a very disciplined approach and integrity management program that we follow at IPT, so that the things that we do are repeatable and are consistent. And that's what we want. We don't want for somebody to bring their thought process from the Saudi Arabia into the Bakken, right? Because the rock's different.
Yeah,
right?
That's one thing that I'm really thankful for. My last job as a project manager within Venture was that, when I first started, it was in 2014, and they told me I was going to get to go all over the world.
Yeah.
And have all the stories like you have. But then the downturn happened. Most fortunate didn't have a job at that point, but I got to go to every basin in the United States, and just seeing the different things between basins, it's just crazy. How much operations can change and downhole conditions change by the rock. And so that's even interbasin within, you can drill 2 wells out in West Texas, and just because they're out in West Texas doesn't mean they're applicable learnings. And so that's what I've always found really intriguing about drilling and completing wells, is that there's just so much variance.
Yeah, there is. And so, in between that consulting career, I was a executive for Parker Drilling. That was a international drilling contractor. I was an executive for a equipment supplier as well. But what drew me back and the interest that I got when I was interviewing for the role at IPT was it's the unusual aspects of subsurface that I really have always thought was really interesting to me. And, IPT gets in all sorts of projects because we have such a wide variety of clients. So we've gotten into solution mining with uranium. We've done potash and truna cavern mining projects. We've gotten involved with municipalities in disposing reverse osmosis water, where they take wastewater and produce potable water, but they have a brine solution they have to do something with. We have to dispose of that in a geological formation. And now we're getting involved with carbon capture and storage projects, which are, that stuff has been around for a long time, back in the 30s, but nobody really thought much about injecting CO2 in the ground. Sometimes you did it for enhanced oil recovery. Sometimes you just did it because you wanted to do it.
Yeah, that's right. What I think. It's pretty funny to me. Like, there's people on Twitter that talk a lot about CO2 injection, storage, and they've been doing this for a long time in oil and gas and enhanced recovery.
We have.
And I also find it funny, like, oil and gas is like, pop up hydrocarbons and then produce CO2, and like, we'll inject it back down too. So it's kind of like this like closed loop circular.
Yeah, but it's just like everything else is that, the federal government gets involved in it and all of a sudden it becomes like super complex, right? And it's really not. But they have made it very complex because of their concern for contaminating groundwater. And, sure, that would be bad, but, there's oil and gas in strategic or stratigraphic and structural traps, right, that have been there for,
Long time.
millions of years.
Long time.
And so if you go into those same type of formations, the CO2 is not going to magically, come up and contaminate groundwater. It's going to stay there. And really one of the misconceptions is that, CO2 is injected in a gaseous form, and that's actually not the case. CO2, a supercritical CO2 becomes a fluid at 88 degrees Fahrenheit and about 1,057 psi. So, structurally, from a subsurface perspective, anything below about 2,600 feet, the CO2 is in a supercritical phase.
Yeah, I actually didn't think about that. I mean, just the temperature of the hole is going to liquefy, right? So,
well, the temperature of the hole is actually going to gasify it, but the pressure in the hole is going to produce a fluid.
And so, it's kind of the same talking points with the misconception around fracking as well. As long as you have mechanical integrity up the hole, where you're actually injecting 2 miles under the surface, and you've got all of this rock between your reservoir and water tables, and so
right.
you have to think that that's plenty good enough.
Yeah, plenty good enough.
Right. Yeah. So
absolutely.
Yeah, the CO2 carbon capture and injection is a really interesting space, and I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity over there because that's something that both sides see. To doesn't matter if you're far on climate side or you're an oil and gas operator, engineering firm.
Yeah,
like both sides
right.
like that solution. So
yeah,
it's there.
Right. It's going to be the demand is there and the interest is there. And what we're seeing is that, from an IPT perspective, there's a wide variety of clients that want our services. So you have EPC contractors that are interested in facilities design for the capture of that CO2, and they don't have the expertise downhole, so they'd like to partner with us. Or you have, large service companies that need that engineering expertise to use their tools downhole for the subs or the carbon storage. And then you just have E&P companies. You have a lot of E&P executives that are now going into that space from a non-E&P perspective. They're doing carbon storage, but so they're bringing their full teams with them. But what we're finding is that they still need specific expertise, whether it's in the geological investigation or if it's in the reservoir characterization, or if they just want some third-party, gut checks on some of that evaluation, because that's a big part of that permit, that Class 6 permit is the geological investigation and the reservoir characterization to make sure you have the right trapping mechanisms.
Yeah, I'm sure those permits require third-party verification.
A lot of them, they just want that gut check.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the whole drilling aspect, which is relatively easy because these are not particularly complicated wells, but they need somebody to come in there and engineer the drilling and then executing on that. And then it's the whole MRV. So that's really a critical element: the monitoring, the reporting, and the verification in the permitting part, but also in the operation part. So you have to have test wells that are validating that these wells are actually injecting CO2 and it's staying there.
Yeah. Not to get too much into the engineering.
Yeah.
Because I suppose that's not the point of the show, but yeah, I'm curious now, on these injection wells that are made for the purpose of CO2 storage. I mean, what like you said, they're not really complex wells because, I assume that these are just being drilled into empty reservoirs, so you don't have to worry about, too much well control and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
But from a well design and construction, I mean, are they just really looking to get as much flow as possible in that, and use, larger casing diameter?
Actually, it's pretty conventional designs. The same type of designs that you use for producing oil and gas
Okay.
can be used for injecting the supercritical fluid,
Okay.
because it's a fluid, right? You're taking a large quantity of gas and you're reducing that volume into the supercritical phase.
Yeah.
But the whole cementing application of that's the federal government's really interested in that, making sure your annulus is actually keeping everything in place where it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But the drilling aspect is not really that complicated. And so when you think about, the reservoir, you have a plume field that happens, right? And so this fluid, goes through the reservoir and starts to, over geological time, it eventually will go into, some type of residual solubility and then mineral trapping, right? So initially you have this phase where it's liquid, but over geological time, 10, 100,000, beyond our lifetime, right? It'll start to solidify within the reservoir. So the whole thought process is like, we got to make sure that initially it stays in place.
Got you.
Right.
Yeah. And I actually didn't know that. So I learned something on the show. Talking about injecting's been a really hot topic out in West Texas, Oklahoma, and Denver with the seismic activity, earthquakes happening. How's that affect from an engineering firm perspective? I mean, are you getting calls from E&Ps that are now needing help with, hey, what do we do with all of this produced water?
Yeah.
I'm sure I've heard it from friends that there's a lot of talk behind the scenes about SWD permitting, and it just seems like a pretty critical issue. Of how do y'all think about that?
So we're very involved in that. As I mentioned earlier, we've drilled over 300 saltwater disposal wells, and we have to work those wells over as well, because you have complications that happen over time with injection. And yes, I think there's also a misconception is that fracking causes seismic. Well, it really doesn't. Mm-hmm. Most of the seismic activities with saltwater disposal wells.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Right. And so, we're certainly cognizant of that. And we work with our client on those issues. So some of those wells, they've decided to plug and abandon and go elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
Because of that seismic activity.
Yeah.
So it's a fluid thought process, but there's less
No pun intended.
Yeah, no pun intended. But the thought process there is that yes, saltwater disposal wells are necessary in some applications, but certainly the industry is reusing water a lot more today than they used to.
I was going to say recycling and reuse of water is as it should.
As it should.
Yeah, should get the attention. So, so tell me a little bit about you coming in as CEO of IPT. What brought you over to this company? Why did you want to take over the role of CEO, and how that came to be?
Sure. So I retired for a while, and retirement allows you to start investigating other things. And I'm not the type of guy that will just sit idly and maybe play golf all day and so forth. That's just not who I am, right? So I started investigating this whole methane emissions thing from a hardware perspective, and I actually got pretty close to investing in that space. But I decided that maybe the from a larger picture perspective, it's the whole certification. Once you find this gas, it's what do you do? How do you mitigate the losses and try to stop methane emissions on different areas? And so that's how I got kind of led into IPT, and IPT certainly did not have an environmental piece to it. And so they, the investors liked the idea that Dave can expand our geographical footprint from an oil and gas perspective. You're going to see us open an office here in Houston later this year. We've already hired a drilling manager in the Houston area. We have engineers here. They're home officing today, or sometimes they're up in Golden. But we're starting to get traction here within the oil and gas space from our clients. And so, that was one aspect of it. And the other aspect of it is to expand our portfolio. And our portfolio typically in the past has been oil and gas. And I've mentioned, some other these industrial cavern mining things that we've done, but we've never gotten involved in environmental services. And so I'm in the process of constructing and opening a environmental consulting arm of IPT. And so that whole arm is going to be involved with methane emissions, carbon storage, monitoring, and verification. There's a whole element of that's going to be, I think, going to be third party, because you have to have some type of, hands-off approach where you're reporting to the federal government that that's okay, and they probably don't want the company that's actually injecting.
They're
not
going to trust you.
And then it's the whole ESG compliance reporting as well. So we're expanding our portfolio and getting involved in just different things that we've done in the past.
Yeah, when you talk about environmental, it's part of engineering, right? I mean, it's not even segregaed.
It's really not, and it shouldn't be thought that way.
Yeah.
There's a huge misperception that oil and gas guys just like to pollute everywhere.
Yeah,
but I would say 80% of the hunters in Texas have some a tie to the oil and gas business. So we love the environment.
There's a huge overlap between oil and gas industry and hunters.
Right. And we love the environment, and we want to protect the environment, and we don't want to destroy the environment. And so to me, the environmental consulting is just one more aspect of what we can provide to the industry today.
Yeah. Also when you look at methane leaks and mitigation, so I always tell everyone on the climate side is like oil and gas companies are incentivized to stop methane. It's literally your product.
Yeah, it's right. You're leaking your product. Yeah,
into the atmosphere.
It's like the milk truck, dripping milk on the way to the store. Exactly. You don't want to do that.
Exactly. Right? So it's like even from an economic perspective, you're incentivized to do these things. But we've had some really cool technologies on the show that just using fascinating solutions to monitor methane. We've had technologies on the show that use lasers that can monitor thousands of acres at once, and then companies like Project Canary that are trying to get into certification. And as you highlighted, ESG accounting. I don't think a lot of people that don't see this day to day understand there's actually accounting metrics that are going to be baked into companies and how.
Right. The whole element of methane emissions has a cost factor, right, that you've just mentioned, but it also has a pricing factor that I think is going to evolve as we go forward. So as companies are able to certify that they emit less and less and less methane, then the gas that they produce is actually worth more to the consumer. And that consumer may not be in the United States. He may be over in Europe through LNG. And because Europe and Canada are kind of a little bit ahead of the United States in their thinking of certification, but I think we're going to get there at some point.
I've always been real curious, and I've asked a lot of people on previous shows over the last 1 to 2 years that if there really is a premium for certified natural gas. And it sounds like in the European market, there may be that Europeans are willing to pay a premium for that gas. I've always, on paper, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it plays out that way.
It just depends on if the U.S. consumer validates and accepts that.
Yeah, I just think they have such a long, like, look at New England. New England imports all of their LNG from, countries that have nowhere near the environmental standards that we do, despite being 200 miles away from the most prolific gas play in the world, around Marcellus, Utica. And so I'm like, it seems like a long jump from that type of energy policy to like, oh, we'll actually pay a premium to have natural gas that's certified. Now, you never know, where the world goes and how things evolve. But, I do think that, that benefits American producers. One thing, we've seen some really dumb energy policy over the last couple of years. And I remember when Shell got mandated by the court that they needed to cut their emissions by 50% by like 2030 or 2040, something super aggressive. I put out a post about all that's going to happen is Shell is going to divest assets, and those assets will now be owned and operated by different entities that have less strict standards. And 6 months after I made that post, you see Shell divested a refinery, Pemex. And I'm like, who would you rather have operating that refinery, Shell or Pemex? And so I think systems like that actually help, the cream rise to the top in terms of operators, where like, hey, you care about your operations and you care about sustainability and not leaking methane, and you get a premium product.
I think you will, but regardless, the cost side is still material, meaning that what we're finding is that the majority of leaks are coming from facilities and tanks.
Yeah.
And those are actually relatively easy to mitigate the leak at that point. And so therefore, look, there's all sorts of hardware out there. There's ground-based hardware, there's drone hardware, there's airplane hardware, and there's satellite hardware. And they all have different applications. And so what we're interested in is consulting with companies to help them to reduce those leaks. And whether they improve from a cost perspective because they're putting more gas in that pipeline, or whether they're getting a better price for it, we're indifferent to that. We think that we're actually improving the efficiency of the marketplace. And so our customer, the E&P company, is benefiting from that.
Yeah, 100%. Agree with that too. So yeah, it's
and you really need, so what's also interesting is there's a lot of data coming in, and this data is coming into E&P companies, and they're looking at this data from a SG&A expense perspective. Their engineers are working on this. And what our selling point is that if you bring a third party in there to look at this data and to analyze this data and to help you with that, then it's tax affected because it's on the operations side of the equation.
Oh yeah.
And so, they get benefit from a tax perspective on that.
Yeah.
And then it's third party as well. So we're in the process of building, out a database to start helping with that thought process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for IPT, you guys are based in Denver, and that's where you got your start. Now moving into Houston, y'all want to continue focusing on domestic American oil and gas operations, or is it the goal to keep bridging out to international market?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is we're going to break out into international. For example, we're working in New Zealand on a frac STEM engineering and operations project. So, what I bring to the equation is New Zealand. It's a pretty nice place to work, actually.
Yeah, that's it. I was under the impression that we don't drill in pretty places. That you only get places like East New Mexico.
What's pretty cool about it is that we're supposed to be doing a back-to-back rotation, and we had like 10 days between projects, and so the guys over there said, "Oh, we'll just take a vacation in the South Island, and we'll come back and do."
It's like, no, I don't want to come back.
I don't want to come back. Like Oklahoma, New Zealand in the wintertime.
It's like, you can go to Ardmore, Oklahoma, or New Zealand.
Yeah. I think that was a pretty good choice. But But yes, we're getting involved in more projects internationally, and some of the larger service companies are drawing us into those projects where they need engineering expertise, especially in the Middle East area. But we've also been involved with some bidding in India as well as Malaysia. So
Very clear.
I think like we're not going to have a huge operational execution team over in the international. That's complex to do. But from a pencil and paper perspective, we can do a lot of work in Houston and a lot of work in Denver for these projects. And maybe go over there and present, but from an execution, there's probably more body shop type consulting companies that can do
that
the
becomes
execution.
much more intensive when you're actually executing.
Right.
But
We're more interested in the engineering, reservoir geological evaluation for those projects.
Got you. So if someone's listening to the show, we got lots of oil and gas folks that listen to the podcast, obviously, and they want to learn more about IPT, and they want to connect with you. Where can they go to find IPT? What's the website? Are you on LinkedIn? Give us the plug. Where I can find you.
Yeah, so we're all on all of the guys, the 60 plus guys are on LinkedIn. You can see my happy face there. I don't think I have as much gray hair on my photograph on LinkedIn. It's fun to age your photographs, right? Because they actually look better.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But our website, one of the initial things that I did when I came in is let's redo our website. So our website's new. So you haven't been to our website here in the last 8 months, you'll see a new website, and that's IPTWellSolutions.com.
Awesome. So we will plug that link into the show notes. If you are interested in catching up with IPT, go and check them out there and connect with Dave. He's a really cool dude. Sounds like he's been all over the world and probably has a lot more stories that we didn't get to dive into today. So Dave, thanks for coming on the show.
All right. Thanks very much. It was fun.
If you like this episode, please share it with a friend. It's the only way that we're able to build this thing is by word of mouth. So found an interesting, please share it. Share it on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, whatever your preferred method of social media is, and we will catch you on the next show.